Been great to be with you these last few days. I've met a lot of people, a lot of names. So people come up to me and go, Stephen McAlpine. I go, hey, that's my name too. And feels a little like that. What we're going to do today is look at where it's all going. We've looked at how do we get here, what it feels like, and now we're going to look at where's it all going. What I'll do a little bit differently today, if it's going for an hour and a half, you don't have to settle in until I stop talking, because where's that all going? And I'll stop at certain points, and we'll have some questions then. And I'll just set a time limit on that, and then we'll start the next section. It gives everyone a breather, a chance to ask the questions about the things we're talking about at that particular time. So that's what we're going to do. Okay for that? Let's settle in and go for a car ride. Where's it all going? Imagine Sunday after church, a DeLorean sports car from Back to the Future suddenly appears hissing and steaming in the church car park. And someone jumps out of the car who, as the steam and the smoke clears, it looks exactly like your pastor, only 30 years older. I don't know if that's possible for some of you pastors out there, and he runs over to you and you go, oh, and you can see in the corner of the church building the pastor, 30 years young, the now pastor, talking to someone else, and there he is. And he comes up to you and goes, quick, we haven't got a moment to lose. I want to show you what a faithful, flourishing Christian community looks like in 2054. And here you are in 2024, next week. And you jump in, and that'd be great. He wants to show you what the pressures are that over the next 30 years are going to build up. He wants to show you what you need to do to be ready for that. You're wondering if there are going to be hoverboards, finally, as there haven't been from Back to the Future. But you would love to do that and see what is it going to be like 30 years from now. And you're not going to get the chance to do that, though. You know that's not going to happen. That can't happen. But you can sort of predict some of the trends of where the future is going and figure out, figure out some of the things. Because here's the thing, you can't take out of the bank what you haven't put in. You can't get to 2054 and decide, now we should figure out some of these pressure points that we're facing. You want to be able to say, if we're going to be a faithful, flourishing Christian community in 2054, best start now. Best start now. What do we need to get ready? And I think that's probably the big pressure that churches are facing going forward. 20 years ago, a lot of books came out about how to do church, because the pressure was numbers are falling, the census data are showing that, and that's only going to get worse. How do we reach new people? The numbers are still dropping in the West. 20 years of... I used to go to Coorong, and there were just... You could tell the church was under pressure as an entity because of the number of books about it at Coorong. Everyone was writing a book on it, so much so that every book that had the word church in it, for a joke, I just changed to the word cheese. So I just went through, your cheese can grow, the cheese on the other side, sticky cheese. It's funny. You can do that at Coorong, but not with my books, thank you. Not with my books. Don't make fun of those. Where's it all going? Are we just going to quietly fold our wings and the Western church will die off and the church in the rest of the world will take off? Are we just going to be like in 1,000 years' time? Oh, there was a flourishing church in Turkey at the start of the Christian era. Oh, there was a flourishing church in America and Australia and the UK in 1850, but no more. Is that how it's going to be? Those are all questions that we need to think about. And if there is church, what will it look like? And what will we need to leave behind? Some people are going to say there are theological convictions we should leave behind. Other people are going to say there are church practices we should leave behind. What's it all doing? But I didn't want you to despair too much because I had this experience at Providence Church where I'm a member and was one of the pastors of one of the congregations for 12 years. And we had our Providence Church Network church gathering last year at a school. In fact, at this school that this picture's taken at. And all three congregations came together. And you know, when you get your 3 or 4 churches together, you're going to get your best preacher. It was Rory Shiner, of course, because he's also the best looking. And and you're going to get your A-list musicians, right? And if you don't know who your A-list musician, you're not on it, right? And we had communion, and we had a great time of sharing stories about what God's doing, and there was baptisms. And afterwards, on the oval of the school, there was festivities and parties and people selling stuff and doves generally and lambs at exchange rate. No, not quite. And my friend Ollie, who I hadn't seen for a while, and I used to share a house with him in England about 30 odd years ago, and he now lives in Perth. He bowls up to me and he said, "Hey, I want to introduce you to someone. This is Claire." And there was Claire. She works with me. Ollie is the team leader for all of the Westfield Shopping Centre interior outfits across Australia. He's based in Perth. He said, "Claire works with me. She's one of my creative directors. She's just become a Christian." I was, because there was Claire standing before me, white, Western, well-educated, 40-year-old, happy, husband and kid. She didn't look like a university student from China who'd never heard the gospel. She didn't look like a trailer park lady. And I was like, "Oh, how? People like you don't become Christians. What's going on?" So I said, "How did you become a Christian?" Expecting some funky story. And she said, "I just felt that something was missing in life. And I'm at work. And Ollie seemed to not be very anxious during COVID. There's that non-anxious presence thing. And we got talking, and she said, we started talking about the Bible, and she said, "Do you read the Bible?" He said, Yeah, I do." And she said, could I have a Bible, maybe? "Oh, yeah, you could have a Bible. I'll get you a Bible." And a few months went by, and maybe she'd come to him and ask questions about that, and then she said, "Do you go to church?" Yeah, I go to church. We go to church. Could I come to church?" "Yeah, you could come to church." And she came to Providence Church and became a Christian, just like that. And I'm going, "What?" It wasn't in some funky church that met in some hipster part of town. It was just, plain white bread Providence Church. I was astonished. And, I used to be a journalist as well. I don't think I was at Chris's level of journalism, so I asked some journalistic questions at this point. I said, "So how does it feel?" And she said, "It feels light. It feels like a burden rolled off me." I said, "There's a Sankey's revivalist in that says something about that somewhere." I said, "Wow, that's interesting. And what else does it feel like?" Because that was great. Journalists have follow-up questions, and that's all I had. And she said, "It feels like I don't need the approval of other people. If Jesus approves of me." Oh, wow. Now, somewhere along the line, she had to confess with her mouth that Jesus was Lord, believe in her heart that God raised him from the dead, and she was saved, repent of her sin, and trust. But the two big issues in our cultural moment that seem to be hampering people, that burdened heaviness that leads to a generalized anxiety that expresses itself in fear and anxiety in people, was dealt with. And that other one of always seeking the approval of everyone else, or fearing that you're going to be cancelled by someone else, or that living before you do you, but you're living before an audience of everybody, that was dealt with. And how did that happen? Just a regular church with a regular person sharing the gospel with her who was not anxious about life, and God saved her. So that seems to be the strategy, right? But that seems a long jump at some level from where we currently feel. But Claire's experience mirrors a lot of people's experience in our modern world at the moment, and I think will continue to do so going forward. For while it's easy to say that the ground has been burnt over and our numbers will keep going down, God might just say, "Hold my non-alcoholic beer. Let's figure that out." And I noticed in the Asbury revival, you may have a view on the Asbury revival, what happened at Asbury University, where it felt like a great movement of God had happened among many students, which was very unlike many other out there revivals. And you can have your opinions on it, but I read this in the Gospel Coalition from a student who was at Asbury as a student and was caught up in what seemed to be a movement of the Holy Spirit. And he says this: imagine that, like me, you grew up in a hurricane blitz of secularism that systematically dismantled your belief in the unseen. Even if a miracle should happen, you'd probably be too sensible or cynical to believe it. Before you hit puberty, rampant individualism forcefully placed you in a cage like a circus animal and handed you an iPhone so you could pretend you're not lonely. And you use the phone, and sometimes it works. When it doesn't, you grow anxious and put up more walls, so you're never challenged, no, never invited to attend to the depth of the living God. The postmodern pressure of not pressuring keeps people from asking hard questions. Just go back to that again, sorry. Meanwhile, you're living virtually. Entertainment is the unrivaled deity in your life. Algorithms of billion-dollar companies have monopolized your attention, your worship. Sometimes you try to escape this vicious cycle, but with the speed of life, it's like trying to land flat-footed after jumping out of a moving sports car. Anyone want to sign up to that lot? Which seems the opposite of what the Apple ads seem to indicate when they're offering new products. There's a sense of despair. And suddenly, God breaks in. Not because you were primed for God breaking in, because God broke in, just like he did with Claire. What's going on? Whatever the future holds, it isn't a bright, shiny, secular, progressive, scientific, post-religious age. Because the questions are still coming to the surface. This is Paul Kingsnorth, who used to be an atheist writer, who became a Christian. Paul Kingsnorth, he's a great writer and a great thinker. And he says this: I grew up believing in things which I now look on very differently. And here is a list of the things that his culture told him in not so many words, because it no longer has to tell it in words, it's just the given. To put career before family, to accumulate wealth as a marker of status, to treat sex as recreation, to reflexively mock authority and tradition, to put individual desire before community responsibility, to treat the world as so much dead matter to be interrogated by the scientific process, to assume our ancestors were thicker than us. I did all of this, or tried to, for years. Most of us did, I suppose. So when people say, oh, the stuff you believe is pretty rubbish, I go, better than your rubbish. These are the options that people are facing going forward. We looked at the dome. What our culture is saying to us: you can have private opinions about things. You can believe what you want in your head, but they're not public facts. There is this hermetically sealed dome of secular immanent frame, they call it, the immanent frame of thinking around our world. Reality is contained within that. Nothing goes in or out or moves between. And then suddenly the New York Times is sending reporters to Asbury to ask what's going on among the young people who they've got an iPhone and they've got an education and they've got all the sex they could want and they're hungry for something more. That's what's going on. And that's what Tara Isabella Burton, aka Wednesday Addams, had said yesterday. The remixed hunger for the same things humans have always longed for a sense of meaning in the world and personal purpose within that meaning, a community to share that experience with, and rituals to bring the power of that experience into achievable everyday life. And we go, whoa, church, we're ready. And then she adds the kicker, but they're doing it differently. So meaning, purpose, community, ritual. I know that can be a bad word to say in some denominational contexts, but it's the ritual you don't see or write down or articulate that's your ritual. Other denominations are more, ritualistic about it. Rituals on the surface, not below the surface. And she says they're doing it differently. And I think this is where the critical point's coming. Is the church, in the way it lives its life and presents its message, going to be compelling enough to say that we do those things far better than the world? Now, much of that is up to God to save people, right? But he uses means. He uses gospel means through a gospel community to bring the gospel to bear in word and deed in people's lives. And Ross Douthat, conservative Catholic who writes for the New York Times, every time Ross Douthat writes in the New York Times, expect 2,000 comments hating on him from people who live in Brooklyn, right? That's right, in a single-bed apartment. But he asked this question because he, as a conservative Catholic, thinks that spirituality is back, but it isn't settled as to what it is yet. Does the future belong to the secular progressivism of an ageing West, the supernaturalist Christianity of a youthful Africa, or to the collision of both with some sort of emergent post-Christian spirituality, the rise of techno-religion or the return of pagan magic? I think he's onto something there, because I think the last is actually what we're starting to see. A DIY spirituality, which feels a lot more like the unknown gods of Acts 17 at some level. Yesterday in The Guardian, I read The Guardian for my sins and to feel better about them. The zeitgeist is changing. A strange romantic backlash to the tech era looms. This is at Christmas. And Ross Barkin says, church attendance, long the barometer of the US's devotion to the unseen, has continued to plummet, but taking its place isn't any of the pugnacious new atheism that tugged at the discourse for a stretch of the 2000s. The new atheism is so 2010. Instead, it's what can be loosely termed spirituality, a devotion to astrology, witchcraft, magic, and manifestation that has emerged, particularly among the young, who in 30 years' time will be the cultural shapers, narrators, legislators, and politicians of the generation. If you thought the hard anti-God scientism was pushing through the politics, law, universities, wait till astrology, witchcraft, magic, and manifestation becomes central. We're not going to a less spiritual world. We're going to a more spiritual world. But that's not quite true. Because I said that because you are really Western in your thinking, no matter how Christian you are or not. If your spiritual eyes could be opened in this room, truly, you would see things here that we can't see because we believe in an invisible realm. Yeah? We do. We don't act as if we do, often. But that's the world we live in. And for much of the apologetics that we had was to try to dial down the strangeness of Christianity to fit the modernist mood. Next minute, everyone's getting into unseen realm stuff. That's the world we're going to be moving into. Shameless plug before I will actually take some observations about that, because I'd like to hear, especially from younger people, how their friends think about some of these things. My next book, Future Proof, really starts with the DeLorean sports car, so you got that page for free. How does the church get ready, and how do we live for Jesus in a culture that keeps on changing? Because if you said to me 15 years ago, Richard Dawkins and his ideas will sort of be like, oh, really? The amount of time and energy we put into, and well done to do it, unapologetic that critique that, that's not where people are going today. The new atheism will not rule the world because it couldn't deal with the meaning and purpose question. That was the big flaw in the argument. Open it up for, say, 5 minutes. A couple of questions, maybe 2, and a comment. Every comment's worth 2 questions, so barter carefully. And I'll decide what's a comment and a question. No. Observations. Rob Martin at the back there. Who's that man I don't know called Rob Martin?
I'll kick us off, Steve. Thanks very much for your presentation. Just to extend what you're saying, maybe it's a half comment, half question. Would this help explain, say, the rise of someone like, say, Jordan Peterson in place of, say, Richard Dawkins, who offers a kind of a form of spirituality, but it's actually a sort of a fusion of a lot of the things that you've talked about? I don't know, would you want to comment on the rise of, say, someone like Peterson, for example?
Yeah, very interesting. The rise of Jordan Peterson has been filling a meaning and purpose hole. Right? So Jordan Peterson didn't start off as spiritual as he currently is in some respects. And there's definitely a sort of Christian mashed up with Stoicism, sort of pagan Stoicism, and he's very much into Jungian psychology. But in a sense, what I've noticed, the hardest group of people for Christians to reach, I'm going to say this, is probably not the gay community. It's young, tradie blokes who don't give a rip, who on Friday night are buying a couple of cartons to put in the back of their ute to have a good time on Friday, perhaps find a one-night stand on Saturday, sleep it off on Sunday, launder, rinse, repeat. And they have the highest suicide rates, most dangerous activities, and they never darken the door of our churches. And they flocked to hear Jordan Peterson preach hour-and-a-half long talks about Genesis and read books that told them to tidy their room. And we're going, oh, why aren't they in church? Oh, Jordan Peterson's not a Christian. No, he never said he was. But he was tapping into something of great need among a cohort that feel lost and aimless and directionless. And my Iraqi barber, I have an Iraqi barber, so when he's got the cutthroat razor and says, what do you do for a living? I feel kind of morph into a, standing on a beach in an orange jumpsuit sort of feel. And he reads Stoicism, books on the Stoics. So people are looking everywhere for something. And he's certainly not going back to Islam for his answers. He's not in Australia because he had a great experience in Iraq via Syria. So I think he's tapping into something. And I'll also say this, that my experience is through another church in Melbourne, run by a friend of mine. Jordan Peterson has become a gateway drug to Christianity for a lot of people. That a Jordan Peterson reading group, say that quickly, run in a church hall because their group asked could they use the church hall, morphed into an evangelistic group. Because it seemed like Jordan Peterson was a stopover to something better and bigger. Because at its core, Jordan Peterson is self-help. It's pull yourself up by your bootstraps, right? As long as your boots are clean, you should be able to do that. So I think people didn't predict it coming that way, that there's that rise for order. Order is a very big issue in our culture at the moment. And if we don't give people godly order, they'll look for order in all sorts of other places, I think. Is there another question? One more question? Hand over here.
When you think of the paganism of European cultures going way back, do you see the green movement, political, the tree hugging, if I can talk about that line of thing as being going back into that, and therefore that whole spirituality, Mother Earth and everything associated with it is what we're seeing capture the young generation. Middle Melbourne, it's all voted to the green, which is not historically something that has, been our roots in the past.
Yeah, and I think that's changed because maybe 15 years ago I was walking through a street of a town in Perth in the hills, so it's a greenish area, and someone stopped me to talk, would I give some money for something green? And I said, no, I don't have any, but I said, I'm a Christian. He said, oh, you're a Christian, so you're Genesis 1 and 2, so you believe in looking after the creation. I would not think that someone who's an activist signed up today would have any clue about that, right? So in one sense, part of the green movement is we want to go back. We want to go back to a pristine planet with less humans. Right? And paganism is, you'll sacrifice any number of humans for it. The pagan green movement also diminishes the value of a human because it doesn't believe in Genesis 1 and 2, and it raises the value of a non-human and other sentient beings. So what you get is that the real problem on the planet are the humans, and the real solution is less humans. Hello, Thanos, right? Because Thanos, in the Marvel series, is looking for peace and quiet and tranquility and less, and the universe is going to be overpopulated and we've got to get rid of half of them, so he gets rid of half of them. And the last scene of the movie is him sitting down on a chair looking at a sunset. And so our tension is that we believe that the creation is groaning, not waiting for the disappearance of us, but for the adoption of the sons of God. And so in my book, the last chapter of this book, I wrote a chapter on ecology because it's a pressure point for people coming into the church who say, what do you people think about this? Don't you Christians just think we should destroy the earth? And as Adam pointed out, subdue means something different than destroy, because it's a major worry. My book split into some of the pressure points we're facing that we can do better at, and also some of the anxieties that our culture has that we also have that we've got responses to. But I had to switch out a chapter, because one of the chapters looked too much like one of the others, and I thought, what should I use? I thought, I have to say something about the ecology, because everyone's asking the question, and you've got to have a Christian response to it. And if you don't have a Christian response to it, that's good and deep and rich and affirms the created order, then paganism seems to be offering something exceptionally good. You've got to have articulate answers for that in the next 30 years, rather than it's all a myth. Whatever part of the spectrum of that you're on, you need an answer for that. We've had 2 questions, and I can do with half a comment or even a question.
On.
Yeah, here you go.
I'm just asking this on behalf of my daughter who's just finished grade 6. Mm-hmm. There's someone in her class who claimed to be a witch, and just the reaction of the other girls in her class was that was neither here nor there, not very strange or unusual. But when my daughter wore a cross on her, a badge, she got some sort of raised eyebrows, disdainful looks from that. I just wonder mainly about the witch thing. Do you want to comment on how that fits in with what you were saying earlier with the return of the occult or anything trend in society?
A couple of things. There's an unseen realm. You would expect someone who's wearing a cross to be frowned upon in a way that you wouldn't expect someone There's spiritual forces in the world, and we unleash them. That's the other thing. Paganism, witchery, is about power. How can I control something? So everything in our culture at the moment is feeling I'm losing control. And if witchery has lost its scary aspect, because we've all been, sort of, every series is about that. And though the great irony is many of the great series about witches have a really strong gospel theme running underneath them that people don't pick up. And I think it's that repaganizing issue, because paganism is about transactional power. How do I get power from this spiritual force to get what I want, the manifesting kind of thing? So I think we've dialed down the fear of that, and we've dialed up what it could get you. So even if someone isn't into witchery, the whole idea of the universe is going to manifest itself to, that sort of thing. So what happens in the end is there's only two realities in the world. There's things that are created, and there's a creator. That's the Christian framework. When you break that, it melds those two things together. Paganism doesn't break that distinction. Everything's of the created order and therefore usable. So it's very much about what's technique. It's very much about controlling things to get your outcomes. So witchery today is kind of cute, but it's also increasingly seen as something that will get you what you want. So people will do whatever gets them what they want, and witchery, all that pagan stuff, is coming back. But it's also filling the vacuum, because we're spiritual beings and spiritual creatures. We want meaning and purpose. But I would expect to see an increase in that. And of course, because the gospel is the gospel, and our enemy, the devil who hates the gospel, will always rail against it in whatever form. Plus, witchery is now seen on the totem pole of intersectionality. The white Western male guy in his mid-50s is, they're the worst people out. How do I sleep at night? And anyone who's marginal is elevated. And that would be the pagan world as well, because it was once victimized by Christianity and oppressed, traditionally, the Catholic Church, etc., as the myths would go. And now we've got to re-elevate it, because it's the true spirituality. It's older than Christianity, and that's another issue to do with it as well. People are interested in the ancient things, but not just Christianity. So you'll see parallels. You'll see people become Greek Orthodox and Roman Catholic because it's older than, a building that's painted in the latest colours with the church vision statement on it. It's true. And they'll get into witchery because it's ancient as well. It seems like it can embed them in something from the past. That'll be my garbled answer. Let's move on. Another 15 minutes and then we can have some more questions. So what does it mean for the church going forward? Well, I think there are three reasons the church's future is bright. And I think if we do, over the next 30 years, I think we can play it well. I do, incidentally, like the cover of my book. I love it. And people say, you can't judge a book by its cover. And every time you say that, a graphic designer sheds a little tear, because I think you can. Anyway. So judge my book very strongly by its amazing cover, okay? And it's meant to represent the rapid discontinuous change roller coaster. Now that I had to explain it, it's not such a great cover, right? Three reasons the church's future is bright. The church will out-purpose the culture. We've got meaning and purpose in our lives that isn't determined by looking inside ourselves to discover it. I know that sounds counterintuitive, that it's in the denial of ourselves that we find life. And that's true when we become a Christian, and it's true every day we're a Christian, and it's true every day that we engage with other people. To take up your cross daily is to die to yourself every day. And we're living in a culture that has got so many ideas of what you should be, but no clue as to why you should even bother being them. And I wrote, given all this autonomy in our culture to be ourselves and find our true purpose in life, with fewer and fewer social and moral impediments to trip us up along the yellow brick road, and given that we live in a society that has vast amounts of creative resources and finances to mould the narratives that shape us, we would assume that everyone is pretty much living their best lives now. everyone must be making authentic hay while their individual sun shines, right? But we don't see that. It feels like everyone is scratching around for meaning and purpose and then false starting and then starting something again. And what I'm saying in this book is that we have a purpose in the gospel that will ride through that storm and offers meaning and purpose to people. If our generations are going to Asbury and are becoming Christian or are looking for some sort of moral purpose and framework, then it behooves us not to fall into the same expressive individualism that I was talking about. Because if people look at us and go, well, your meaning and purpose looks pretty much the same as mine, achieve, get, live your individualistic lives, create your Mindari Marina. If that's all our life looks like, then people will assume what our meaning and purpose in life is. It's when they see things that look different to that, that cost us seemingly in ways that there's no transactional return, that they start to ask serious questions about why we would do what we do. We're just not living weirdly enough in that respect. I think that we will outpurpose the culture and can outpurpose the culture in the way we live more directly, clearly, and in self-denial. When people see us serving in ways that doesn't give us stuff back, it's critical. When people see others give up the career move so that they can spend more time with the people of God and serving others. None of that makes sense in our cultural moment. We can outpurpose the culture. I also think we can outrelate the culture. You do realise that 30% of Australian households are single-person dwellings. 30%. And it's on the rise. Not just because people have to live alone. Why? They want to. They want to. My wife and I watch a series on YouTube called Apartment Therapy. And it's hip and urban and full of modernist ideas, which I kind of love and relate to, or think I relate to when I'm watching the show. But it's full of people in New York especially who show you around their apartment. And it's built for one. And it's filled with the objects of, this is where I go out this, and this is where and there's no sense of lack in their lives as they live alone. Now, they may interact with people, but they are crafting their lives in such a way that they don't relate the same way we relate. But it takes its toll. There's a ministry for loneliness in the United Kingdom because of the loneliness epidemic in the UK. It's all in cubicles and everything. No, that's probably an open plan office, I hope. But the church says we're not alone, we're bound together in Christ. And the thing over the next 30 years is that you can remember your early days of Christianity, if you're a teenager or a young 20, where you spent a lot of time with other Christians. And then you hit 30 and 35 and 40, and you become this isolated little family often that dips in and out. And I think the future for Christians is to just dial up the amount of time they spend together in meaningful ways. And one of the issues of the loneliness is that we're more polarised. Once we don't agree with someone, we can't hang out with them. Once they don't hold to the same set of values we hold to, they become our enemy. The point of the gospel is we are told to maintain the unity of the Spirit in the bond of peace. We don't get to attain the unity of the Spirit. God gives us, well, here's the unity of the Spirit, off you go. That's how it works. We don't get to decide who we hang out with at church. Isn't that sad? Because I've got my idealised church crew who I'd like to hang out with. And you're going to get people come to church who have not had good families, who have had no family, who are same-sex attracted, who are divorced or widowed or single by choice. And if your family unit is a closed, hermetically sealed thing off from their lives, then you're just living like everyone else. They want to look through the window and see the table with everyone at the table who doesn't look like they would belong, except for Jesus. That's what we want to do. That's a great evangelistic opportunity when your son or daughter's friend from uni comes to your house for dinner and sees what a family looks like living together and having dinner together. Actually having dinner together. I'm going to say this. A teacher did a test in a class of 30 students and 2 children had dinner together with their families at night. And they were Christians. Everyone else. We're atomizing even in our own houses, in bigger and bigger houses where each of us has got our own zone. When we were building our house, the consultant said, you know, you've got 2 floors, do you want an intercom system? I said, oh, don't worry, I'll just yell. He looked at me strangely. But we can out-relate the culture. And part of that's about the forgiveness thing I said yesterday. Because if the solution to a forgiveness and unforgiveness issue in your church is either Mrs. Jones sits there and Mr. and Mrs. Smith sits there, or someone leaves at the first, then you're just modelling what the world does when you cancel people. And we say, well, do those things really matter? Yeah, because of the invisible realm. You just got to believe that. And there's an increasing fascination among progressive Western nations, an increasingly frantic one too, with trying to build a workable unity among their citizens going into the future, trying to make us all relate well to each other in spite of our deepest differences. The aim is to create a unity that is no longer based on nationalism, ethnicity, or religion. That is the political move in our culture. How do we bring unity to people? And we saw that fail this year. Regardless of what you think of voting yes or no, the Prime Minister said, this is about unity. Well, the unity ship in Australia sailed a long time ago. We're fairly fractured. And we don't deal with people very well who differ to us. And we don't have to. We don't have to. The algorithms make sure we don't. The things I read are confirmed by the things that are pushed forward by the algorithms for me to then read, which is why I sort of have the Australian First Things, which is a Catholic journal, the New York Times, the Guardian, the Age for my sins, and because you've got to read widely to see what other people are thinking. If you're under the age of 30 here and you want to really do something in the next 30 years, read widely. Read things you disagree with. Because the first time you hit something you disagree with, you'll arc up. And if you're 40 and you've never had a person around your table who you disagree with, well, hello Thanksgiving in the United States most years. But you take out the big picture things that people believed in a culture, and it's very hard to bring unity. And the church is an opportunity to show what unity across difference looks like. I've actually been encouraged by the nationalities on this stage. Deep unity in the gospel. Robert Bellah, who coined the term expressive individualism, also said, just when we are in many ways moving to an ever greater validation of the sacredness of the individual person, our capacity to imagine a social fabric that would hold individuals together is vanishing. If you've read The Great Divorce by C.S. Lewis, you know that his picture of hell is people living in a town who can't get on with each other, and they sell their house and move further and further away into eternity. And all you're doing is moving further and further. We're living that culturally at the moment. There's no social fabric that's holding people together. We don't volunteer. We don't join organisations with people that think differently to us. Third thing is the church will outlast the culture. Why is the political issue of our day, why are they so hot? Because they're end games. Everything hinges on them. Ros Ward from the Safe Schools Coalition we talked about yesterday. I will never give up fighting for a more free and joyful world. And you better believe it. But if everything hinges on here, it's like when Stalingrad was the last bastion for the Russian soldiers. They fought to the death with their backs to the wall. And if this age is all there is, you will fight to your death with your back to the wall for everything. It will be a zero-sum game. And that's our political battle at the moment. If you take God out of the picture, if you take God out of that picture, something like a flip game of Tetris moves into place. And at the moment, politics is God in our culture. That's how we're playing it. It's a zero-sum game. It doesn't just have winners and losers, it's got saints and sinners. It doesn't just have, right and wrong ideas, it's got good and evil ideas. All the categories are religious in our politics because we've lost where's this going? And part of our problem is in the 1970s, we probably got hooked on last time's theology in a way that was not helpful, and we lost our really good biblical understanding of eschatology. And we read things back into the text of the Bible that aren't there, and then we all got collapsed in a heap and said, ain't nobody got time for that. And then we've just flattened our hopes. But if you live in the Western world and you go to a church that's kicking goals and your life's doing fine, you can flatten your hopes pretty well. Because this life, if you're doing it right, the Jordan Peterson way, and you've got your house in order, pays out. But Christians in Afghanistan aren't thinking that. Their sermons are not 6 sermons on financial success or 5 sermons to a happy marriage. They're saying, even so, come Lord Jesus. And so what hasn't happened over the last 20 years is that we have not prepared our people that they might end up being cultural losers for 30 years, 100 years. But it's okay because our hope is not embedded in this age. And you will get angry if you think it is. You'll be an angry Christian. Everything that goes different to what you want in the politics or the legislation or the culture will infuriate you because it's a zero-sum game. Lift your eyes above. See where it's going. We've got eternity on the horizon. How about a few more questions or comments? Then we'll kick on. I want to look at next at some of the other features of what a post-Christian world will look like in the next 30 years and some of the challenges they'll bring.
Hello.
Hello.
There we go. Thanks, Stephen. My question comes with a context of having studied trauma therapy and religious trauma.
Mm-hmm.
I'm wondering if you have a comment or a reflection. There have been many scenarios where the good guys, i.e. the church, have actually really been the bad guys.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a category of people who are deconstructing and trying to make sense of the God that perhaps they were taught about and the hypocrisy that they've experienced. And I'm wondering if you have any encouragement for us as to the future of the church, where there are people who have been wounded and how they can be tended to when their experience is so against, like they don't trust the church that they've come from, maybe from their childhood or along the way.
And it is a thing. And that's what I said in being the bad guys. Sometimes you've got to take a hit, because we were. There wasn't a Royal Commission on institutional childhood abuse for no reason. Ezekiel 34 always springs to my mind. That God is against the rough sheep that trample down the pasture and muddy the water that the small sheep can't get to because of those who are trying to feed themselves and gorge on them. And we're promised in Isaiah that a bruised reed he won't break, and a smouldering flax he won't put out. That I meet people that church is just too traumatic to go back to, and I just kind of keep pushing them to Jesus, that he is the good shepherd that's promised, that God himself in Ezekiel 34 says, I will come and shepherd my sheep myself because you leaders are not doing a good job of it. And then the charge in 1 Peter 5 is, as under shepherds, look after the sheep. And the key word is under. For when the chief shepherd appears, he better not smell lamb barbecue. And I think part of the issue, it says, when the chief shepherd appears, you will receive what? A crown of glory. Everyone's looking for glory. It just depends where you're looking for it from. If you want glory in this age, you will destroy people. If you are a harsh leader, if you're a leader who's bullying people, and you pay account for it. So I think I would say to people, we don't want to diminish anyone's, and I don't want to just say, well, just the church is okay, it's full of hypocrites, join. I think I don't think we should say things like that. But you have to say that to people, one of their comforts is that the judge of all the earth sees this. And he'll meet you in your brokenness where you are, and he won't break you more. And he's against those leaders who've done that. And I think the church is paying the penalty for having a little bit too much power and then pushing sin under the carpet in these areas. So whatever's happened the last 30 years, some of the repair work has to continue into the next 30 years. You speak to the evangelical Anglicans in Tasmania, and they've been selling off buildings to pay for the repairs. The Anglican Church in Tasmania has to rebuild its reputation in that state because of the things that have happened historically. But you can't go to the big, heavy prophetic books in the Old Testament and not see that that has been a problem all the time. And it's worse for those in the age of the Spirit, God's, post the cross and resurrection. So I think we should be sobered by that, and we should be able to give people an answer that doesn't just say, we'll turn up anyway. I think you've got to be able to walk with people through that. And we have the resources to do that, but we have to walk very carefully with people who've been very bruised by the church over the last 30 years. That's what I would say. Ironically, we're getting to a stage where most generations will never have been to a church. They're not walking past our church, as I said, saying, if I never go to church, that's the one I'm never going to. They just don't see it. So that will drain off, and there'll be people who are curious about church because they have no experience of it whatsoever. But that will take some time, I think. But it's brutal. As I say, my wife's a clinical psychologist. She sees people who've been bruised by the church all the time. Sometimes that's just where you sit and cry with them. We don't actually have to say something all the time, sometimes I think, and just love people. Let me push on for a bit. Some of the things that I think are quite confronting coming up. Tom Holland reposted this tweet and said, no, this really is post-Christian. New Canadian survey on attitudes to euthanasia. 27% think people should have access to euthanasia because of poverty. 41% among the 18 to 34-year-olds think that. 28% of people think you should have access to euthanasia for homelessness. 43% for mental illness. And 50% for being disabled, which rises to 60% among the 18 to 34-year-olds. So you can believe that in the next 30 years, when legislation is being written by people who are currently 18 to 34, those numbers will go up. They're Canadian figures. Even the Canadian Liberal press was astonished by and horrified by the Department of Veteran Affairs offering a man who was looking for a home, a vet, euthanasia. 4% of all Canadian deaths last year were euthanasia. 4%. See, when you are your own and you do you, even this becomes my choice to do what I want with my body. And the government will step in quickly if it doesn't have the funding to get you a house. I'd be nervous as an old person in an aged care facility, as many Dutch old people are. Because it is a slippery slope. We're seeing it in the Australian Capital Territory, where young people as young as 14 are being told that they can have assisted suicide if their mental health issue is too strong. 2 doctors need to sign off on that. Well, given most doctors are training between the ages of 18 and 34, do you think their views are any different to this? That's the world we're going to have. Which could tell the church that we could do something about poverty for some people, share a house with someone who needs it, not find the weird person who's slightly way out there on the spectrum as someone we can't deal with, and honour those whose bodies are failing them because we're out-purposing, out-relating and outlasting the culture. And it might cost us time, money, comfort, Mindari keys. Who knows? And I said this slide. A deep interest in and commitment to our eschatological hope is not defined by the end-time charts we embrace or the prepper bunkers we own, but by godly lives of hope centred around the total victory that Jesus will bring to his people. And that will shape your life. And I think that whole desire for something more should be our apologetic. Tapping into what people are saying about the unseen realm and saying, I know it sounded weird 20 years ago to say that we believe in the unseen realm, but we actually do. Now, Rory Shiner, that good-looking, flaxen-haired young man who I showed you a photo of yesterday, and Peter Orr, who's Northern Irish and a bit balding and a bit more geeky like me, so that's okay, wrote a book called The World Next Door, A Short Guide to the Christian Faith. And they mapped out the creed and said, we're going to walk the creed through and explain it bit by bit in the context of what it means and our own gospel experiences growing up as Christians, and explain to you what Christianity is all about. Now, it's a riff on the book The Universe Next Door. But they're saying people don't even know what the furniture in the Christian house looks like anymore because they never come into the house. Let's explain to you that it's older than just the last 20 years. It's got deep, rich tradition. And they explain the creed. But you know what? They don't start with the creed. Do you know how they start? With the story of Jesus casting out the demons from Legion into the pigs. They start with, here's a ghost story, true. You think, who's going to buy that? Here's why. You can give people reasons for Christianity all you like, but if you can't give them a framework where there's a heaven above and a hell beneath and an earth in the middle and that they leak, think no one's going to understand Christianity because that's our framework. And too often we've bought into that dome thing and say, let me try to explain Christianity to you as sensibly as I can, given what you will commit yourself to believing. And we're saying, category error, it's this. And it's weird. But it's no weirder than witchcraft. And if someone's coming to it, open to spiritual ideas, go hard on that. It's true. So they start that way, just as Francis Schaeffer started his lectures at university talking about angels in the most modernist era of all. It was counterintuitive, but that's what they did. So I think the future of the church, and often we're sort of shrinking back, right? We're shrinking back from It's getting hot out there. Let's keep our heads down. Let's just buy 5 acres in Belgrave Heights and fence it off. Wait for the zombie apocalypse. But that's not what we're called to do. Look, this isn't my son, but I did teach my son how to skate. By watching and telling him what to do, of course, not by actually skating. And you stand, I watched him because I videoed it, with your skateboard at the top of the ramp, with 1 foot there and 1 foot leaning out over into the Grand Canyon abyss, 4 foot of polished concrete. And what are you supposed to do? Which way? Yeah, you lean in. And everything wants to what? Lean back. And what happens if you lean back? It's funny. Skateboard that way, kid that way. Got it in slow motion, you know. Perhaps in the next 30 years it's time to lean in, even in the face of the conflict. And perhaps we need to lean into a few things. Leaning into discipleship will be critical. Thickening up how we do discipleship, given that there's a discipleship culture already. Secularism. And it's very formative and very immersive. And it's on your phone and it's everywhere. But we're discipling people all the time, and we're discipling our own people all the time by what we do. And if leaning back in difficult times means we'll just go to church once every 2 or 3 weeks, and we'll make sure that kids can do all the activities because we want to show them what the good life is really about, don't be surprised if they don't end up loving Jesus. Now, Tim Keller says, why is it that 17 years of kids going to church in America, where they go to church on Sunday and do Chubby Bunny's youth group on Friday night or whatever it is, and they're ostensibly Christian, then they go to college, and 1 term later they come back at Thanksgiving to sit around the table to argue with their parents about God's actual existence and to sheepishly say, I've now got a live-in girlfriend or boyfriend. How did 17 or 18 years of discipleship get taken over by 1 term of university? And he says, because the discipleship program at church was on audio, and the discipleship program at university was on video. It's more compelling, more immersive, took more of their lives, spent more of their time together with those people than church ever did. It's immersive. And what we're going to have to do over this is why I'm careful by saying we don't need ninja Christianity where you've all got to give up your jobs and then live in communes. But how do we dial up over the years just a little bit thicker discipleship with people? How do we lean into people's lives a little bit more and say, maybe not that, or, let's spend time together over a meal, and instead of just chatting about everything, let's put our phones to the side and talk about how we're parenting with technology. How do we help our young people who are dealing with technology that is in their face all the time? How do we have drip-filtered conversations with people? How do I, as a pastor, go and have lunch with someone different every couple of weeks from work, from church who's in their job? Go to their job, have lunch with them in their place, see what it's like. We're going to have to just dial up that discipleship thing and lean into it a little harder. Because it's not even on video now, it's digital. And I think we've got to lean into difference. So don't be afraid to play up the difference. We're not trying to show people that we're just like everybody else in order to gain a hearing. And that's where I had that book, The Creed. But also think leaning into dissonance. I'll explain what I mean by dissonance. Leaning into, that hits different. Not being afraid to say that, I believe my view of the world is completely different to yours, and if you want to believe anything I believe, you're going to have to set aside a view of the world and take on a new one. And 20 years ago, if you knew that a Christian was getting on Q&A, you go, Lord, I have not cracked the spine of my Bible all week. I've done those things I ought not to have done, and left undone those things I ought to have done. But please let it not be a crazy Christian. Let it be a sensible Christian. So we're not shamed. No, you don't want to be shamed, but what often happened was we wanted the panellist to be a Christian who could say, yeah, I mean, my idea of human flourishing pretty much aligns with your idea of human. That is not true anymore. You want to get onto Q&A and say, my view of the world is completely at odds with your view of the world. And it's a category error to frame the things you're framing as if I think that. I want to show you a completely different framework. So what you're going to have to do, even if you're not on Q&A, is say to people, let's park your assumptions about how the world is and where it's going and what it looks like there, and I want to show you that I am totally and eminently sensible, given this framework. Because unless they're immersed in understanding that framework, they'll never get Christianity. It'll just be a stitch-on to the modern way of living. I think we can afford to lean into what I call dissonance. Here's the last one, and you won't like it. You may not like the other ones, but you're too polite to say. You can come and have something afterwards. Leaning into defeat. Oh, I don't like that one. What if, over the next 30 years, when that pastor comes back, his suit looks a little cheaper, his shoes look a little shoddier, and you get in and there's gaffer tape around the gear stick? What if you don't get the jobs you wanted to get in law and politics and health because you're a Christian? What if you don't get the job at the big firm? What if the Christian schools are shut down? Do we have a category for that? Or are we in the West granted the special card when it was handed out in history? God goes, oh, you don't get suffering, you don't get persecution. Oh, we'll push it all to those other people in places you can't pronounce. I think we have to lose what I call our implicit prosperity gospel. Because I'm not standing on here with a white shiny suit. I could have, I did pack, but I packed light. And we're not those prosperity gospel people, but we've got an implicit prosperity gospel that somehow God owes us. I do, because I'm an older brother at heart. All these years I've slaved for you, and you've not given me that I might celebrate with my friends. Just fill in the blank, and that's what we're like. But here's a story, isn't it? This is one of my favourite paintings by Breton Riviere, Daniel and the Lion's Den. I love the lions because they are both raging and impotent at the same time. And the story of Daniel in the Lion's Den is that the king looks at Daniel and sees no fault in him. But the other leaders are jealous. And they conspire against Daniel, knowing that there's no fault in him at work. He doesn't steal the pencils, he doesn't take blame, shift blame, he doesn't take credit. And the king wants to make him second in charge. And they say there can be no fault found in him except for the law of his God. He won't wear purple, wear a purple day. So they conspire against him and tick into the vanity of the king with, "O king, live forever, no one should pray to any other god but you for 30 days. And he signs off on the law of the Medes and Persians. And what does it say? When Daniel heard the edict, he did what he had always done. He went, oh, crumbs, it's getting persecuted around here. Let's start ramping up our spirituality. No. Now, you will do the things you've always done. And you will find out what they are when the pressure comes. But he goes to Jerusalem, to his room, and he opens the windows to a rubble heap in Jerusalem and prays towards it because that's where he knows his salvation lies. Even though he lives in New York. Babylon was so good it took its builder, the breath of its builder away when he looked over and saw how amazing it was. But already, Daniel had never looked there for his hope or his comfort or his integrity or his identity. He looked towards Jerusalem and then, that's my hope. God's salvation will come from a rubble heap called Jerusalem. And nothing looks like that's going to work. And it looks like 900 extra thousand people are no longer going there. And then when they came for him, the king was anguished. But the law can't be changed. And Daniel is thrown into the lion's den. And the stone is rolled over. And night falls. And the king can't sleep. In the morning he comes. And he rolls the stone away. He says, "Oh, Daniel, has the God whom you serve forever been able to save you? You can't keep a good man down." He's taken up. He's raised up. And the bit you don't read to your kids at 7:30 at night is, "And those other people and their kids were killed by lions." Ha ha ha. And Daniel is given second in charge. And the king writes to the nations glorifying God. And we like to think, if I do the right thing by God, he will do the right thing by me. But you're not Daniel in the story. Jesus is Daniel. Jesus, no fault in him. Wicked leaders conspire to put him to death. Outside that city, Jerusalem, he's thrown to death. The stone is rolled over. Night comes. But in the morning, you can't keep a good man down. Jesus is raised and is placed at the right hand of the Father on high, and currently rules and reigns and will return from there. And the nations will see the glory of God. And if that's not enough to keep you going when you lose your job, or your credibility, or your friends, what is? You can abide defeat over the next 30 years if that's our king. Yeah? That's my hope. I don't know what's going to happen in the next 30 years. Could be great revival. In fact, Tim Keller, before he died, wrote an article for The Atlantic. And he said, this is why the American church is due for revival. And he lists these reasons, including some of the things I said before. And then he said there was no such thing as monasticism, through which pagan Northern Europe was turned Christian, until there was. There was no Reformation until there was. There was no revival in the United States through John Wesley and George Whitefield until there was. There was no revival in England that grew the Methodist Church and stopped the revolution and shut the taverns and the houses of prostitution until there was. Claire, at Providence Church, wasn't a Christian. Because she was. Because that's how God works. Keller ends it. Christianity, like its founder, does not go from strength to strength, but from death to resurrection. Perhaps something in us needs to die. My rights, my entitlements, my hopes for a good job, my hope that I get the right Prime Minister in place that will get the legislation that will allow my school to. We've been pinning our hopes in all those things. We don't know what the future's going to do. But it goes from death to resurrection. And one day we too will be raised. That's our hope for the future. That's why we're future-proof.